Hello there. Wondering where to get videos for a history lessons? Or you're a curious type just like me, wanting to know more about history and governance? Worry no more. Heslife TV has got you covered. Please watch our videos, like, subscribe to our channel, and hit on the notification button. Obituary Abigail Serum is the name, a student of K University. Thank you.
Hi there. You are welcome to Heslife TV. Before we begin with our discussion today, I would like to remind you to please subscribe to the channel. If you have not done so, click on the red button under the video. And in case you have subscribed to, we thank you very much for your support. This is the only channel where you get access to history, CRS, as well as government WASI lessons. All the lessons uploaded on this platform are based on the WASI syllables, and then sometimes we also take a look at trending historical news and facts around the world. So yes, it's a full package. So please subscribe to the channel for us. Good. So now let's come to our lesson for today. In our previous lesson, we've been looking at colonial policy of indirect rule in Ghana, and we have learned a lot about indirect rule in Ghana, and I know by now you can explain what indirect rule is. In case you do not know, in our previous lesson, I have included a link over there. I have titled it RPK, the relevant previous knowledge. So check in the description there and click on it to view or to watch the our last lesson, so that you can be able to understand the issues I'm going to be raised here. Now, we discussed about the role of the traditional leaders in the indirect rule system. We have also looked at the reasons for the adopting of indirect rule by the British, and then why the educated elite also opposed the policy. And so today we are going to look at the advantages or the benefit of the indirect rule policy. So what was the advantage or the benefit that the British and the people in the Gold Coast benefited from? What did they gain from the indirect rule policy? And so we will look at the advantages of the indirect rule system today. So let's go in there and look at our lesson objectives for today. So it's quite simple. Our lesson objectives for today will be that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to discuss the advantages or the benefits that the Gold Coast got from indirect rule, or the benefit or advantages of indirect rule in the Gold Coast, now Ghana. So what was the benefit of the indirect rule? And that is what we are going to be looking at. So take your pen and paper and just jot some important points down. So let's begin with the advantages, because I know by now you can explain what indirect rule is, and so we don't need to bother ourselves with the explanation of indirect rule again. Now, the first advantage or benefit of indirect rule in the Gold Coast, or to the British or to the Gold Coasters, was that indirect rule solved the problem of insufficient British officials. So it came to solve that problem. Now, you recall in our lesson on the reasons for the British adopting indirect rule system in the Gold Coast, or even in British West Africa, was mainly because they lacked personnel to work in the colonial administration, where we said that people or officials, British officials who were posted to the Gold Coast or to British West Africa were not willing to come because of the climate, because of the weather condition, and so they refused to come, and because of that, the British lacked personnel to work in the colonial administration. However, with the adopting of indirect rule system, what happened was that the British were able to solve this problem of insufficient personnel, in the sense that what the British were going to do was that they resorted to rely on traditional chiefs and their council of elders, okay, to rule the vast British colonies in West Africa. You get a point, because now you also recall in our previous lesson the roles that the traditional leaders played, or the chiefs played. They did almost all the work for the British crown, and therefore that came to solve that problem. And don't forget, these chiefs and traditional rulers were not paid. They were just doing their job, free. At times they were not paid, and so they were able to rule the vast British colonies in West Africa through these traditional chiefs and their council of elders. And that, we are saying, was one advantage of the indirect rule system to the British crown. Let's look at the next advantage or benefit of indirect rule system to the British. So the next one was that indirect rule system helped in the easy administration of vast colonial territories. Most of the colonial territories, or most of the colonies, were very, very large. And so what happened was that the system again helped the British to administer their vast colonial territories without incurring much expenses. Okay, without incurring much expenses. So the lack of money to cater for British officials was also solved through the use of traditional rulers who were not, or were little compensated by the British. So you also recall in our previous lesson that one of the reasons for the British introduction of the indirect rule policy was that they lacked the imperial fund. They lacked money. Okay, lack of fund, and so they didn't have the enough money to pay for the salaries of administrators who may want to work in the British colonial administration. And so what happened was that they relied on the traditional chiefs, and these traditional chiefs were not paid. At times they were not paid at all, and so it helped the British to be able to administer the vast or large colonial territories that they had acquired without spending much, because you needed was just a governor and then the district commissioner, and the rest, the work was done by the chiefs and the traditional leaders. And so what we are saying here is that indirect rule helped again the British to administer vast of their colonial territories without having to spend or incur a lot of expenses. Good. So I hope you are cool with these two points. Let's go in there and look at more of the points. The third one says a benefit or advantage of colonial rule was that it helped to preserve the native institutions and traditions. So preservation of native institutions and traditions. And if you could recall in our previous video, I said here that yes, the British did well by trying to maintain native institutions and chieftaincy. However, I also said that they did that for their own selfish interest. They were not actually maintaining or preserving these chieftaincy institutions or native institutions and traditions for the betterment of us as African people, but they preserve it so that it can aid them to introduce the indirect rule policy that they had wanted to introduce. Because without these native institutions, the indirect policy was not going to be possible. Remember, we said that before the indirect policy could be a success, there should be an existence of an effective political system. And so they wanted to road on the native institutions. That is why they preserved it. Okay, yes, and so yes, in a way, they did preserve it in a way. One thing that they also did for the native institution that myself I really love about that was that they introduced modernized way of administration. And this modernized way of administration was, for example, they aided the traditional leaders to keep records. So keeping records of native courts proceedings. So whatever happened in the native courts that they allowed these traditional leaders to establish under the indirect rule system, they encourage them to keep records for future use. Again, issuing of native treasury receipts. So they also issued receipts to those who paid their taxes, and also presiding over legal cases. And most importantly, they documented most of the kings or chiefs that ruled from that point on, because traditionally Africans relied on the oral tradition to preserve some of these names of chiefs that ruled the empire or the group of people or the state at a particular point in time. They relied on oral tradition, passing on from generation to generation, because the art of writing had not been invented, had not been known to the African. And so this is how they preserve some of these traditions. But we all know that oral tradition has its own difficulties, its own limitations. Okay, and so one important thing was that if you go to the archive, for instance, today, you'll get records of all the chiefs that ruled the state. As at the time, I think the indirect rule system was in place, because I remember when I was doing my long essay project work at the university, and I happens to write the history of a town known as Adansi Brofiodu, somewhere in the Adansi area, Fomena area there. And so the oral tradition that I was getting from the family head, he had lost track of some of the chiefs that ruled the town, especially the year that they ruled. And lo and behold, he gave me the name, but when I checked it out at the archives in Cape Coast, in Peidu, I realized that the chief's name was there, documented or recorded, and the date or the year that he ruled had also been documented. And so this is how they came to modernize our native institutions, the introduction of some of these record keeping and stuff. So yeah, that in a way they preserve the native institution and also try to modernize it through these means. Now again, indirect rule also help to maintain law and order in the society. Okay, so in addition, indirect rule brought about the maintenance of law and order in the traditional areas. This was made possible through the activities of the traditional chiefs and the existence of native authorities and traditional institutions, such as the native police, the native court, and the native prison. So you also recall that in the role of the traditional chiefs in the indirect rule system, the chiefs were allowed to set up these native institutions. So native police that was known as the Ahimfe police or the palace police. They were to ensure that peace and order was in the state. All right. The native courts were also established by the chiefs or the traditional rulers to trial cases of marriage, land disputes, and other things. And the native, of course, prison were all there. So with these native institutions in place as a result of the indirect rule system, what we are seeing here is that the indirect rule system with it, these native institutions help to maintain law and order in the state, whereby nobody could do whatever that they like, because there was a law and order that could, catch up with you. There was a law that could catch up with you. And so it made people to really rarely misbehave, and things were done in that order. Unlike before indirect rule, when there was wars up and down and all of that. Good. So I think these 2 points too are clear for you. Good. So let's look at the last one, I guess, and then we'll bring our discussion to an end maybe. So it also promoted local system of government. Indirect rule also promoted the local system of government. So it serves as a kind of local self-government, where the chiefs were used by the British to rule their own people, all right, in their own traditional way. Okay, in their own traditional way. Now, the system thus laid a strong foundation for the present local system in independent African states, where local government areas have traditional representatives. So yes, today we have what we call local government council. And I think that the indirect rule paved the way, laid the foundation for local governance system as we have it in our political setup, the DCE and the MCEs and co. Those are the local government or governance people, because the chiefs were at the local level. They were the ones trying to implement whatever that the British had wanted to introduce. It was the chiefs that implemented those ideas or those policies. Okay, and so that is why we are saying that it led to the promotion of local system of government. And so yeah, I think that's all. I think okay, we have the last one, and then we'll bring the discussion to an end. Let me see. So it also helped to abolish, indirect rule also helped to abolish certain inhuman practices. Okay, it is believed that our forefathers or Africans were into certain inhuman practices, such as human sacrifice, twin murder, panyaring. And the panyaring was when you were so this is the panyaring, a twin murder and human sacrifice, as well as slavery. Now the panyaring was when you were owing somebody, and maybe your daddy is owing man A, and then your daddy is not able to pay man A. Then your daddy would tell you or will sell you into slave to man A to go and work for man A, so that you can cancel your father's debt. And that was what the panyaring was about. The twin murder, okay, the twin murder too was when the people at this time, scientifically, they did not know how come a human being should be giving birth to two people. They felt it was unusual, because about 99% of humans, or as a woman, you're supposed to give birth to one person. So to them, if you gave birth to two, they thought it was something from the gods, and so they would kill the twins and take them and send them back, to their maker. Then the human, of course, sacrifice. We all know that, and then slavery. So in the indirect rule system, what the British did was that they signed various treaties. Okay, they signed various treaties with the various African leaders, African chiefs, to end some of these obnoxious practices. And if you look at the bond of 1844, you will find some clauses here. Even if you look at the Formula Treaty somewhere in 1874, you will see some of these clauses there, forcing or putting pressure on the traditional chiefs to do away with such inhuman practices. And these things were possible because of the indirect rule system that the Europeans had, that the British had introduced into the Gold Coast. Good. So let's look at the try work here. So what were the benefits of indirect rule in the Gold Coast? So please, you try your hands on them. And thank you very much for your time. Please subscribe before you leave for more educative contents like this.